Rome liked to call itself eternal. It said the gods loved it. It said the law lived in its stones. From the hilltops the city shone like a promise. White temples, red roofs, bright sunlight on the Tiber. But if you stepped down into the alleys before dawn, before the markets roared and the senators rode past, you heard what kept that promise standing. You heard iron ring on iron. You heard low voices counting. You heard the careful, tired breath of people who could not leave. This story begins on such a morning. A boy carried a lamp through a narrow corridor under a rich house on the Calian hill. The floor was packed dirt, the walls were rough and damp, small chains hung from a pegboard. He knew each one by sound. He knew which link had a notch, which hook had a burr, which shackle pin stuck in cold weather. He was not a child anymore, not really, but Rome did not care about his birthday. Rome cared about his status. He was a slave. His name does not matter here, because there were so many like him that any one name could hide 1,000 faces. We will call him the boy in this first part, the way old records do when they do not bother to see a full person. He belonged to a senator's household. He woke when the house woke, and often he woke before it. He lit the furnace, he fetched water, he counted linen, he counted cups. He counted punishments too, because in this house, as in most houses, discipline had a number. The boy's hands knew the feel of a wax tablet. His job was not in the fields or the quarry, it was in the shadow world of a great home. He copied lists, he wrote down orders, he stood very still while free men spoke above him, and he did not speak unless spoken to. He had learned the rule every enslaved person learned in Rome. The safest place for a slave's eyes is the floor. Above him, Rome ran on words like virtue and order. Below those words were other words, shorter, harder, colder, whip, chain, collar, brand. There were many kinds of collars in Rome. Some were simple rings of iron, some carried small plaques of bronze, stamped with a cruel message. I am a runaway, catch me, return me to my master. Some had a loop to hold a tag with a name and a reward. A collar turned a human into an object with a label. It made the city honest about its secrets. The boy had watched collars being made. In the shop off the alley, the smith laid iron on the anvil and bent it with steady taps. He quenched the hot ring with a hiss. The smell of steam and iron stuck in the hair and did not leave for hours. The boy knew the weight of such a ring in a quiet room. He knew the sudden hush that fell when a steward lifted one from a shelf. Punishment in Rome was not an accident, it was a system. It was not a burst of anger, though anger came often. It was an agreement the city made with itself. Pain would keep the machine running. There was the lash, a short whip with several thongs, sometimes knotted, sometimes weighted with bits of metal. It tore skin. It did not need to kill. It needed to mark, to frighten, to break habits, and bend the back down to its work. There were chains for ankles and chains for wrists. There were stocks. There were dark rooms with low ceilings where a person could not stand up straight. There were ergastula, work prisons on big country estates where men and women slept in rows behind bars and were driven to the fields by a man with a stick. And above all these, like a shadow as long as the empire, there was the cross. Rome crucified slaves. Not every slave, and not every day, but enough that the word lived in the mouth of every overseer. A cross on the road said, "This is what happens when the body that carries the bucket decides it will not." The cross was slow. It was public. It was meant to be watched. It was not only a death, it was a lesson. The boy knew this before he knew his letters. You did not have to see a crucifixion to understand it. Its shape lived in the stories, told in whispers, after the lamps went out. But on this morning, a sharper fear ran through the city. A famous case had just been argued in the Senate, and everyone spoke of it. A powerful man, one of Rome's own, had been killed by a slave inside his house. The law said something hard. All the other slaves under that roof, every one of them must die for not stopping the murderer. Hundreds of people, some with children in their arms, were led out to execution, not because they struck the blow, but because Rome demanded that the house be one body and the body be loyal. The boy had not seen those deaths. He had seen the crowd and the soldiers, the locked gates, the lines of watchers folding around the streets. He had heard the rumor pass like a winter wind, 400. He did not know if the number was exact. He did not argue with numbers. He felt what everyone in chains felt, how the city could decide to push one rule to its edge and crack it wide open to show its teeth. The message was simple. The way messages are when they are meant to stick. You are responsible for the hands beside you, and if those hands act, your neck pays. So the boy moved through his tasks with careful steps. He brought the steward a list, oil jars counted, wineskins sound, loaves prepared. He did not drop a cup. He did not meet the steward's eye. He did not speak to the cook unless the cook spoke first. He pressed words into wax and smoothed them flat and pressed them again. The day before, a kitchen girl had bitten back a sob when the whip cracked inside the inner court. The mark across her shoulder would make brushing her hair a new kind of work for a week. If we are honest, we should say that Rome was full of many kinds of people and many kinds of masters. Some were kinder, some were cruel. Some promised freedom after faithful service, some gave small gifts at Saturnalia, some never lifted a hand and let others do the lifting. But the city's power did not rest on mood, it rested on a clear rule backed by legal pain. The slave was property. Property obeyed. If property went wrong, the law would not stand in the way of what a master chose to do with it. This is not guesswork. The law books are cold and neat. They say that a slave's word in court did not count unless he or she was tortured for it. Imagine that. Imagine being told that the truth in your mouth weighed nothing until a rope or a whip or a hot plate made it heavy. Rome called this seeking the truth. It meant that if your master was accused, your body might be made into a witness and your screams would be called evidence. The boy knew this not because he had read the words. He would copy parts of them later, but because he had seen a messenger come to the side door with a sealed tablet and heard the steward say, "I will prepare them." The city dressed its cruelty in clean clothes. Senators spoke of safety. They spoke of custom. They spoke of fear. Fear of revolts, fear of fire, fear of knives in the dark. Rome had seen slave uprisings before, the great wars in Sicily. The leader from Thrace who broke out of a gladiator school and shook the Republic for 2 years. Everyone remembered that. Everyone kept that memory as a reason to keep the chain tight. But memory is not only a chain, it is also a whisper. In the kitchens and corridors, slaves told other kinds of stories, quiet ones that did not leave the room. They told of small kindnesses that felt like rain after dust. They told of secret coins saved toward a peculium, the tiny private fund a master might allow, a thin path to buy freedom one day. They told of runaways who made it to a port and vanishing ships. They told of people who learned to read and hid that skill like a flame cupped in both hands. These stories were fuel. They kept the heart from going out. The boy listened. He learned. He watched the calendar. Some days the city was softer. On festival days, the streets belonged to everyone, free, freed, slave, foreigner. The noise and color made the walls feel wider. On those days, the boy carried a tray beneath a painted doorway and felt, just for a moment, that the world was bigger than a list of chores. Then the festival ended, the lists returned, the iron's voice was the same. Late that morning, the steward's voice cut through the courtyard. "Bring the collar," he said to no one and to everyone. The sound of those words moved through the house faster than a runner. The boy did not look up. He did not need to see who had earned it. He heard the shuffle of feet. He heard a woman's breath catch. He heard the ring lift from wood. He heard the small, dry click of a rivet in tongs. We must be careful here. We must not make pain into a picture show. We must not turn another person's hurt into our thrill. But we must not look away so far that we forget what the Empire decided was normal. The collar was not meant to kill. It was meant to declare. It said, "This body is known, this body is watched. This body will not run again without dragging a bell through the streets in its own mind." The steward fixed it. The woman held still. The cook wiped a bowl with a cloth that was already clean because her hands had to do something. The boy counted the cups again. He had not always been here. He had once stood in a little port under a hot sky, in a line of boys and girls whose eyes were quick and whose wrists were roped. A trader had looked at his teeth. Another had asked if he could read. He had learned his letters in a town that would not say his name now. He had said yes. A coin changed hands. The world tipped. In the afternoons, the boy carried tablets to the master's study. The study smelled of cedar and ink. The floor was smooth. The walls were lined with scrolls that a free man could take down and read when he wanted to know how the world worked. The master liked Greek. He liked history. He liked to say that Rome had inherited wisdom and made it useful. On one wall hung a short whip with dark knots. It hung there like a part of the furniture. It did not need to move to do its work. It reminded. That day, the master spoke of the Senate case again. He told a friend that the punishment was severe but necessary. A house must be safe, he said. We are few and they are many. He did not lower his voice. He did not need to. The boy wrote down the shopping list that came after: lamps, oil, pepper, a bolt of cloth for a new tunic. There was nothing on the list that said pain, but pain bought the time in which men could sit and talk of live. We can follow the boy into the evening and see the city's other face. In the Subura, a crowded district, taverns filled with noise. The floor was wet from spilled wine. A runaway passed through with his eyes on the door, a cheap cap pulled low. In the markets near the river, iron collars hung from a stool's edge, the same shape in different sizes, like bowls or lamps. A soldier haggled for a price. A baker's boy laughed at a joke that was not funny. Down at the docks, chains rattled on a plank as a gang carried amphorae off a ship's belly. They moved like one animal. A guard watched from the side with a short vine staff in his hand. He did not raise it. He did not need to. The staff was a sentence that did not need to be said. Beyond the river, in the countryside, the system grew larger and quieter. On big estates, people slept in long rooms with barred windows. They woke to a whistle. They walked in lines to the fields. They turned soil until their hands bled and the blood mixed with dirt and became something the overseer called good earth. They knew the mines too, deep and dark, where the air burned the lungs and the dust bit the eyes, where a man might lose the sun for a year and speak to no one who was not as tired as he was. Damnation to the mines, Rome said, and it meant it. Rock ate bodies the way a city eats bread. This was the hidden world beneath the marble and the music. It was not truly hidden. Anyone could see it. But seeing is different from believing that a thing is the center of what you are. Rome preferred not to believe that. It liked to talk about roads and law and gods and triumphs. It did not like to say out loud that millions of human beings had to be bent low, day after day, for all of that to move. The boy learnt a second rule in this world. Watch how power acts when it is afraid. Power smiles when it is calm. It hosts dinners, it gives gifts, it frees a slave in a generous mood and calls itself noble. But when power feels a tremor, news of a revolt, a rumor of a knife, the quiet sound of a lock slipping at night, it becomes very simple. It calls the guard. It reaches for iron. It speaks in the language of pain. That evening, as the household prepared for sleep, A messenger came again, with a wax tablet bearing the city seal. The steward broke it, read, and called 3 names. The boy felt his stomach harden, though his name was not one of them. The 3 were taken, not to the courtyard, but to a small back room. A magistrate would want their words about something that had happened in the neighborhood. A theft, perhaps, or a fire. "It is the law," the steward said, as if laws were weather and could not be argued with. The boy lay awake on a straw mat and listened. A house at night has its own sounds. Mice in the walls, a distant cartwheel, a single cough from a room where a man with rights turned on his soft bed and slept again, and then the sound the law made when it wanted truth. A rope pulled tight, a weight lifted and dropped, a voice asking the same question over and over until the answer, any answer, arrived. He tried to think of water, of a river he had once known. He tried to think of a story the laundry woman told about a neighbor who had saved for years and, at last, had stood with a small crowd in a temple while her master set her free. He tried to think of the calendar and count the days to the next festival. He tried to think of the shape of a letter, neat and safe on smooth wax. He tried to hold something gentle in his mind, because there was so little gentle in the air. The night moved on. The city hushed. The rope at last stopped speaking. When the door opened and the 3 were led back to their mats, they could not lift their arms. The steward said, "Sleep." He said, "Work at dawn." He said, "The magistrate is satisfied." He did not say, "I am sorry." Sorry was not a word the system had room for. The boy's eyes found the ceiling in the dark. He knew the names of the punishments now like the days of the week. He knew the way a cross looked from far off. He knew that iron, once closed, taught the body to move a little differently forever. He knew that a collar could be removed and that a scar could not. He knew that the city would never run out of words to excuse itself. He knew that somewhere, in the same city, a poet would write a beautiful line about Rome's greatness, and that line would travel through time with no mention of this room. He also knew this: people are not only what their enemies make them. People hold on with quiet hands. People share bread. People teach a letter to a friend after lights out, tracing it on a palm with a fingertip. People hide a coin. People hide a song. People smile once, even when smiling hurts, and that smile is a kind of rebellion the law cannot measure. Still, the question lay over him like a heavy blanket he could not push off. How do you live a human life when the world around you says your pain is a tool? He did not have an answer yet. He only had the morning, and the next morning, and the rules, and the tiny, stubborn acts that kept a soul from going dim. Outside, the moon washed the city in a pale light. The river moved as it always did. A guard on a bridge leaned on his spear and yawned. Somewhere on the Appian Way, a wooden cross stood against the sky like a dark finger, reminding the horizon what it was not allowed to forget. And deep inside the house, the boy's eyes stayed open until they burned. He listened to the breath of the others, the slow rise and fall, the small, tired sounds of sleep. He did not know it yet, but the next days would bring a choice to his door that would put every rule to the test. It would ask him who he was under the collar. It would ask him what price he would pay to stand up straight once, even for a moment. The city held its breath with him, though it did not know his name. Dawn came like a thin grey cloth laid over the city. The house breathed, sore and quiet. The boy rose with the others, washed from a basin, and tied his belt. His ribs felt like they were holding in the night. He stepped into the courtyard to sweep dust toward the drain before the master woke. He had slept hardly at all. The steward's voice reached him from the passage. "You," he said, pointing at the boy with 2 fingers as if pinching an invisible thread. "Bring the record tablets. The magistrate's man is back." The boy kept his face calm. He went to the shelf and gathered the tablets with neat fingers. The wax was cool, the cords tight, the seals unbroken. He knew the rule: hold them level, do not smudge, do not add a mark that is not ordered. He followed the steward down the long corridor lined with amphorae, past the storage room where olives sat in brine and a little smell of vinegar hung in the air. At the side door a city clerk stood with a short reed pen tucked behind his ear. He was not cruel, he was tired. He had the look of a man who had learned to think of bodies as lists. "We need statements," he said. "There was a fire 2 streets over in the night. Shopkeeper swears he saw a house slave running with a bundle. Your master will want to cooperate. No one wants suspicion." The steward nodded. "Of course, we all want safety." He said it the way a man says we all want rain. Simple, plain, hammered flat under use. The boy stood still, like a piece of furniture, while the 2 men spoke. He knew what statements meant for people like him. A slave's word did not count unless the law had squeezed it out the hard way. They called it quaestio, questioning. In books, the word sat there nicely, black lines on white. In rooms, it was rope and weight and fireplates cooling to not leave scars too easy to show. The clerk glanced at the boy. "He reads?" "He copies," the steward said. "He keeps inventories. He knows where things are. He knows who moved what and when." "Good," the clerk said. "We will start with him." The boy felt the floor tip a little under his feet, as if a ship had taken a small wave. He had not stolen anything. He had not seen anyone steal anything. He had counted cups, and they had all been there. But the law was not about what you had seen. It was about what your body would say if asked the right way. His stomach made a small knot. "Also," the clerk added like a man remembering cheese, "we need 2 more from the kitchen. The magistrate wants to be thorough. There is a rumour of runaways using fires to confuse the streets." "Livia," the steward said to a guard, not looking at the girl with the fresh collar in the corner, "and Tullus." The girl's hands went to her sides and held them still. The other slave, a wiry man with strong wrists, who ground grain and sang softly to himself when he worked, looked down and nodded once. He had a thin scar on his shoulder like a pale string. He had earned it years before, and it had taught him to walk with his right arm a little held in. The boy's chest felt small. "Bring them," the clerk said. "We will be efficient." He said it kindly. He had told himself that kindness made efficiency a kind of mercy. The house had a small back room for these things, just as most houses did. Rome did not always send people out for the law's work. It often asked the house to make space for it. The room was simple. A ceiling beam, a pulley, a hook, a bench, a bucket of water, a cloth. Tools were not always fancy. They did not need to be. The point was pressure, not show. The boy stood by the wall with the tablets. He did not shake. He had learned not to shake when someone watched him. But his jaw wanted to click. "Start with the boy," the clerk said. The steward looked at him. "You know the storerooms," he said. "Answer and be done." He almost sounded like an uncle saying, "Finish your chores and you can eat." Almost. The boy stepped forward. He stood by the bench. The clerk dipped a pen in ink. "Name," he said. The boy gave the name the house used. It was not the one his mother had given him. That name had become a thing he kept folded very small and tight under his ribs, like a coin no one saw. Tasks. He listed them. Light the furnace, count the linen, copy the lists, carry the tablets, sweep the court, bring the oil, count the cups. Last night, he told it straight. Heard a message arrive, heard 3 names called, heard them return, heard they slept. Did you leave the house? No. Did you see fire anywhere? He shook his head once. No. The clerk did not look at him when he asked the next thing. Do you know of anyone speaking of running? Anyone bitter? Anyone whispering? Anyone angry? The boy's eyes dropped to the floor as if to read some sentence written in dust. He thought of many people, because anger is as common as bread when you are owned. He thought of the kitchen girl's caught breath yesterday. He thought of the grinder's old scar. He thought of an older man in the laundry who had told him a month ago that he was saving coins in a jar to buy his son's freedom first. He thought of a woman who had traced letters on his palm after lights out and said, "This one is an S. It snakes and it stays." Everyone had reason to be bitter, and almost none had a safe place to put it. No, he said. It was true in the only way that kept the room from swallowing him. The clerk's pen paused. Very well, then the law will search your truth. He nodded to the steward. An easy method will do. The boy swallowed. The steward lifted a small weight and the simple loop of a rope. The rope's fibers were rough and clean. The steward had oiled them. He was a tidy man. The boy offered his wrists and tried to keep his face from losing shape. Wait, the clerk said, almost bored. Let him speak again. Boy, do you hold back any name? No. Any plan? No.
Any mark of a stranger at the door? The clerk waved a hand. We will spare him the rope today. He is used to keeping lists, and his words may stay neat without help. He turned his head. Livia. The girl stepped forward. Her collar's bronze tag flashed a little in the lamplight. It was new and still bright. Its letters said that she belonged. The collar did not hurt to touch. It hurt to remember.
The questions began again. They were simple. Simple questions make long lives hurt more. Where were you? Who was in the court? Did anyone speak a plan? Did anyone laugh too softly in a corner? She answered the same way the boy had. Here. Everyone, no. No. The clerk sighed through his nose. The city burned once before, he said, mostly to the steward. Men still whisper about it. We cannot be careless. The steward reached for the rope. Livia bit the inside of her lip and lifted her chin. The boy felt his hands make fists at his sides. He made them flat again. And then the grinder stepped forward. Sir, he said to the clerk, voice low and steady, ask me first. She was in the kitchen. I was sent to the gate in the night to fetch a jar. I can tell you who was on the street. The clerk glanced at him. It was not kindness that moved him. It was the chance to be done sooner. Very well, he nodded to the steward. Use the lightweight. There is a way to tell this next part that makes it a show. We will not tell it that way. We will say only what a person in that room would keep in his bones years later. A loop of rope, wrists lifted behind the back just a little, enough to make the shoulders ask for air. A man's breath beginning to shorten, not from crying out, but from not knowing where to put it when the body says, I am not made to bend this way. A question repeated. Who was on the street? The grinder's eyes fixed on something far away that was not there, because sometimes the mind needs a hill in the distance to keep from falling through the floor. He said the names he knew, 2 watchmen, a baker's boy, a soldier with a drooping eyelid, and said what they had been doing. He told how the moon had hung like a coin broken in half on a string above the rooftops. He did not accuse anyone. The room filled with the small, wet sound of cloth against skin. The clerk nodded after a while. Enough, he said. He has given names. We can ask them. We will not waste more time. He made a mark on his tablet and blew on the ink. The steward loosened the rope's bite. The grinder's arms dropped. He did not groan. He went to his knees, because knees were honest. Livia put the cloth from the bucket into his hands. He wiped his face. He did not look at the boy or at anyone. He looked at the floor, as if the floor were a river he had to cross one stone at a time. The clerk turned to Livia again. Your turn, he said, like a teacher calling a child. The boy's mouth opened before his mind asked permission. Sir, he said, heart pounding, may I add to my record? I forgot one thing. The clerk frowned. What thing? The oil jars, the boy said quickly, feeling his tongue run like a deer. I counted them at dusk. The upper shelf had one chipped handle. It has had a chipped handle all month. I thought you should know in case there was a mark left by a thief's hand. The clerk stared at him. He did not care about handles. He cared that the words felt like neatness. Neatness makes officials feel safer. Fine, he said. Write it. While you write, I will speak to the steward about the street boys we should question. As the two free men turned, the boy bent over the wax and moved his stylus. He wrote the useless note about the chipped handle. Then, with the tiny strokes of a hand trained to hide meaning where eyes skayed past, he pressed 3 letters, not words, only hints. No for Livia, no for Tullus, no for all of us. It was not a magic. It would not stop a rope, but sometimes the smallest thing said at the right moment slows a wheel half a turn. Half a turn can spare skin.
Done, he said, holding the tablet up like a plate. The clerk took it, glanced, and nodded. Good, he said. We are finished for today. The magistrate will call for more if needed. Keep your house in order. He said it to the steward, but the words fell on the slaves like rain that refuses to water anything. After the clerk left, the steward gave orders in a flat voice. Work did not stop for pain. It never did. The grinder went to the mill. His arms would burn, and he would grind anyway. Livia went to the brazier. She would lift pots and pretend the collar was just a ring of air. The boy went to the study to copy names of guests for a dinner that night. He wrote Marcus and Lucius and Gnaeus and thought none of those names sounded like his. In the study, the master spoke with a friend about the new rules from years past that limited how many slaves a man could free at once. Augustus was wise. The master said, fewer freedmen mean less chaos. A house must remain a house. He did not say that freedom had become a door set higher in the wall, harder to reach for shorter people. He did not need to say it. The law said it for him. Midday, the boy carried a tray through the atrium. A visitor was there, a fugitivarius, a slave catcher, lean as a spear with eyes like nails. He had a leather roll of small bronze plaques with holes punched at the top. If any run, he told the steward, I can set notices at the forum. I have friends by the docks. I can watch the road out by the tombs. He smiled without teeth. He looked at Livia's collar as a man looks at a tool on a wall and told a story that was not a story. How he had followed a man once by the sound of a bell a master had hung from a ring, and how the man had learned that even air could be made to betray him. He laughed. The steward laughed politely. Livia did not. The boy listened and learned what fear likes to hire when it has money. In the afternoon, a quiet thing happened, and quiet things are often the ones that last in memory. The laundry woman, who had taught the boy letters with her finger after lights out, slipped him a small crust of honey bread saved from the last festival. For your hands, she whispered, so they remember sweetness. He took it and did not eat it right away. He broke it in half and tucked one piece for later. He gave the other piece as if by accident to the grinder when he passed the mill window with a bucket. The grinder took it without a word. The piece left a faint gold smear on his thumb. The day wore on. Sun moved over the courtyard and turned the shadows like the hands of a giant clock. Men came and went. No one spoke of the morning room. Houses learned to grow skin over their bruises. Toward evening, a small event shook the dust again. A silver spoon was missing from the sideboard where the master liked to show his guests that he could afford to shine. It was not a big thing. A spoon goes missing in any house, but in a house that runs on fear, a missing spoon is never only a spoon. The steward's jaw hardened. Count again, he told the boy. The boy counted. He found the others. He did not find the missing one. Who served breakfast? The steward asked. Livia, the cook said, her voice very small. Who polished last night? Tullus, the grinder said. He did not flinch. The steward looked from one to the other as a man looks from one horse to another at the start of a journey he does not want to take. Search their bedding, he said softly, the softness worse than a shout. The boy's mouth dried. He had seen this scene many times. In other houses, in the street, at the river, a missing thing becomes a net. A net does not care which fish it catches as long as it comes up heavy. The bedding was brought. Hans went through straw. The boy stood with his tablet and fought the urge to make noise with his breath. He had learned to breathe like a cat, quietly and with all the air hidden inside. Olivia's bundle, nothing. Intolis's bundle, nothing. In the boy's bundle, because fear always wants you to prove you are clean. Something hard. A thing hit the floor with a small bright note, like a bird striking a bell. Or silver spoon. No one spoke for a moment. The sound of the spoon seemed to hang there, shaking, long after it had stopped moving. The steward's eyes went to the boy's hands. The cook made a noise without words. Livia's mouth opened and then closed, like a fish pulled up for a moment and then dropped back. Tullus took one step forward, as if to put himself between the boy and a wall he could not see. The boy looked at the spoon where it lay on the hard-packed dirt. He looked at his bedding. He knew he had not taken it. He knew someone had put it there. He knew that someone mattered less than the neatness of the story the steward needed by dinner. The steward breathed out through his nose. "You," he said to the boy, deeply tired, as if tiredness could hang the weight on his words for him. "After the guests eat, we will settle this." Settle in Rome could mean many things. It could mean a whipping in the inner court with no word spoken after. It could mean a brand burned into an arm where a sleeve would hide it unless rolled. It could mean a collar that would never come off. It could mean the mines. It could mean the cross, though that was rare for a spoon. Payne always sat nearby, in a chair, waiting to be invited to dinner. The boy's thoughts were not clever. They were simple. He saw the morning room again. He felt rope that had not touched him. He smelled iron that was not hot yet. He tasted the honey bread he had not eaten. He looked at the faces around him, the steward with his neat cruelty, the cook with her clean cloth, Livia with her collar, Tullus with his old scar, and something inside his chest that had been holding very still since he came to this house lifted its head like a small animal and looked around. There was one more rule of Rome that never made it onto the marble. Terror is strong, but it is also clumsy. It rushes. It looks only where its own finger points. It does not see the small act in the corner unless the small act rises and says, "See me." The boy lowered his eyes. He bent to pick up the spoon. He turned its handle in his fingers. On the underside, near the narrow neck, there was a tiny nick he had noticed months ago when he polished it. A nick like a tiny crescent moon. That nick meant it belonged to a set kept not on the sideboard, but in a chest in the inner study, brought out only for very high guests. Why was this one here, now, missing its brothers? He felt his skin tingle, as if a bee had flown near, but not stung. He straightened and held the spoon with both hands. "It is marked," he said quietly. "This is from the inner set." The steward blinked. "Impossible, that chest is locked." "The key hangs by the whip," the boy said before his fear could stop him. The room went still in a new way. Even the dust listened. The steward turned his head toward the study as if the walls could give him an answer. His mouth flattened. He did not like that line, "The key hangs by the whip." He did not like that a boy had said it in front of other people. He did not like that the house itself had made a little joke at his expense without smiling. He looked back and made his face hard again. "We will see after dinner," he said. "Until then, do not leave this court. If you are innocent, you will be glad to be seen." The boy set the spoon on the table as if laying a coin on a god's altar, slowly and with care. He nodded. He kept his eyes low. Inside, his small animal did not lie back down. It stayed alert. Night came. Lamps were lit. Guests arrived and praised the host's taste. The good set gleamed in the inner room, each piece placed like a soldier in a line. The missing one lay quiet in the court. The house hummed its usual song on the surface, but beneath, a second rhythm tapped with a finger on wood. A count toward punishment. And something else, too, tapped faint but there. The thought that had begun to grow when the clerk's rope hung unused near the boy's wrists. What if the law was not only a wall? What if, for once, it was a thing he could turn in his hands like a tool? What if the mark on a spoon and the place of a key and the habit of a neat man could be laid end to end and make a line that pointed not to his back but to a door? He did not know yet where that line would lead. He only knew that when the diners laughed in the study, he heard, inside their noise, the softer sound of a lock he had not seen sliding shut or sliding open. He could not tell which. And he knew that by the time the lamps burned low, he would have to choose what kind of person he wanted to be under the collar. The one who lowers his head and waits, or the one who once, even once, lifts it and speaks a clear word that the room cannot ignore.
The moon climbed over the tiles. The servant with the water jug passed him for the fourth time. Livia brushed crumbs from a tray with fingers that did not tremble. Tullus ground grain in the dark to keep his body from stiffening. The steward watched from the shadow like a hawk that has decided to wait one more minute before dropping. And the boy stared at the spoon's tiny nick and felt for the first time something like a plan. The house shone like a stage. Lamps burned with calm, fat flames. The floor was swept to a soft, clean grit. The air smelled of warm oil and pepper. Voices rose and fell in the inner room where the master dined with his guests. Laughter clinked like glass. The good silver lay in order, a bright army. The boy stood in the passage beyond the doorway with a tray against his hip. He watched without looking. He knew how to make his eyes into small, quiet animals behind his face. On the couch nearest the door lay a thin man with a calm mouth and careful hands. He wore a plain ring with a clear, deep cut on its face, a dolphin bending around a palm branch. The boy had seen such rings press seals into wax. He had learned to read seal marks as other boys learned to read the sky. The steward called this guest Publius, in the respectful tone men used for someone who knew the rules better than they did. A jurist. A man who could make the law walk on 2 feet and speak in a room. The steward moved like always, neat, quiet, not a hair out of place. He smiled when men's eyes were on him and watched without blinking when their eyes were not. The key to the chest in the inner study hung on a peg by the short whip. The thong of the key was leather, darkened with use. The missing spoon lay in the court outside like a small moon no one would look at yet. The boy felt the plan inside him like a thin wire, not strong enough to pull the world, but strong enough to give his hands something to hold. He breathed. He waited. When the second course went in, he took the water jug to the doorway and stood just inside, as a shadow stands. The jurist spoke softly about a case from last year, how a man had freed too many slaves in his will, and the law had cut the number down to keep order. The master nodded. "Order is mercy," he said, as men who hold power often do. The boy stepped forward half a pace, low eyes, humble shoulders. "Master," he said, voice shaped like a request made in a temple. "Forgive a house-born question." The master frowned, surprised. Slaves did not interrupt dinner, but curiosity was flatter now than anger. "What question?" he said, half amused. The boy kept his face small. "When a thing in a high chest is found in a low court, how does a house keep its honor? Does a good house seal and count before it punishes, so that no wound is given to the wrong back?" There was a thin breath of quiet. The steward's head turned, a finger's width. The jurist smiled, with only one corner of his mouth. "A neat question," he said, eyes on the boy as if the boy were a word written well. "In a good house, the signet speaks before the strap. One seals the chest, calls witnesses, and opens it with the ring whose mark it already bears. If the seal is new or bears a wrong mark, a careful man asks why. It prevents the clumsiness of rage." His voice made a small bridge between mercy and order and walked it without trouble. The master liked the sound of that. He liked any rule that let him appear fair and still be feared. He looked toward the study. "After dinner," he said, as if the matter were now settled on a clean shelf. "We will do this properly." The steward inclined his head, "As the master wishes." The boy bowed out and carried his beating heart back into the passage. The thin wire inside him hummed. In the kitchen, heat breathed on thick air. Livia worked at the brazier, moving with care. The grinder Tullus turned a hand mill outside the door to keep his arms from stiffening. The boy went to the breadboard, where there was always a dusting of white on the wood. He held the tray over it and, as if steadying the jug, let 2 fingers slide through flour. He passed the study door. The whip hung in its usual place. The key hung beside it. He did not look around. He breathed in and out. He ran those 2 white dusted fingers once, lightly, down the leather thong of the key and across the iron bow. The faintest pale smear lay there now, thin as the memory of a cloud. It was nothing to a room. It was everything to a hand. He moved on. He did not look back. Inside, dinner turned toward its end. Wine softened cheeks. The master told a story about a general in Spain. Someone made a small joke about the Senate. The jurist laughed, the way a man laughs at something he has heard before and is pleased to hear again. The boy cleared trenches, poured water, took empty cups, carried new ones. He was invisible and everywhere. At last, the master lifted his hand. "Shall we count?" he said, looking toward the study. "Let us be seen to do this right." The guests, full and curious, followed to the doorway like men waiting for a small sport between dinner and sleep. The household gathered in the court outside the threshold. Cook with her cloth, Livia with a tray, Tullus with flour, pale still in the crease of his palm where the bread had been, the others in a quiet line. The boy stood near the doorpost, tablet against his chest, stylus ready. His breath sat high in his throat. The steward went to the peg. He took down the key. White whispers bloomed on his fingertips. He did not see them yet. He did not think to look at his own hands. He fitted the key into the small bronze mouth of the chest's lock and turned. Before he could lift the lid, the jurist's voice, mild as wine, slid into the room. A moment. He looked at the wax seal that sat like a red eye over the seam. The boy had pressed that seal himself many times after counting. The dolphin ring's bite was neat and deep. Tonight the wax showed a fish shape, yes, but the lines were blurred, and a second faint curve, like a laurel leaf, lay crooked across the first, as if 2 rings had kissed the wax unevenly. The jurist leaned closer. "Who sealed this?" he asked. "I did," the steward said in a smooth voice. "With which ring?" "The master's," the steward said. The jurist's careful mouth smiled without warmth. "That ring cuts clean," he said, pointing a thin finger. "This seal is double and dirty. Someone hurried in or out and pressed his own sign over the master's to make it seem proper." He lifted his eyes to the steward's hands. He saw the faint flour on the leather and the pale dust hugged to the lines of the steward's fingers. He turned his head slightly toward the boy, as if acknowledging a neat piece of housekeeping. The steward saw where the jurist was looking and for the first time in a long time made a small mistake. He wiped his fingers on his tunic as if to brush off an insect. The flour made a ghost streak across clean wool. No one spoke for a heartbeat. Then the master's voice, even, tight. "Open it." The steward lifted the lid. Inside lay the good set, each wrapped in soft cloth, each placed as the boy had placed it after the last high dinner. The boy counted with his eyes as other men count coins. Ladle, 2 pitchers, 6 cups, 12 spoons. His breath paused. 2 wraps in the corner looked too light. He reached in when the master nodded. "Hands steady." He opened the first cloth. Empty. He opened the second. Empty. 2 of the best spoons were gone. The room changed shapes. The air seemed to lean. The master's face did not move much, but something in his eyes hardened, the way wet clay hardens in sun. He looked at the steward. Explain. The steward's mouth held a line like a closed door. They were there when I sealed the chest, he said. The boy has had time all day. The boy felt heat climb his neck. He kept his voice low. Master, I have not been in this room without the steward. I counted at dawn under his eyes. Lies are easier than theft, the steward said. The jurist raised his hand, smoothing the air. Peace, the signet tells a story. This was opened and resealed with another hand. It is bad housekeeping, or worse, but do not be hasty. He turned slightly to the master. If you punish the wrong back in front of witnesses who know better, the story will go to the forum before your next bath. Count with witnesses. Ask who had the key. Ask who had reason to make the master seem careless. The master did not like being told to be careful in his own house, but he liked less the thought of being laughed at in public. Who had the key? He said coldly. The key hangs by the whip, the boy said quietly. Any hand that likes the whip can touch the key. Eyes went to the peg, to the neat place where two tools hung like twins. The steward's jaw worked once. It is easy to smear flour, he said, voice soft and dry. A boy from the breadboard can paint a man guilty with a touch. He had the tray, he went by the door. He could have made... He stopped himself just before he said, this trick. His eyes flicked, not to the boy, but to Livia's collar, to Tullus's scar, to the line of faces that watched without blinking. And he remembered that a house runs not only on fear, but also on small beliefs. He turned back to the master with a humble shrug that did not fit him well. Let me find the thief for you, Lord, he said. Give me the night. The master's nostrils flared. He liked men who solved his problems quickly and cleanly. He liked the steward because the steward had been such a man for years. He did not like that a small boy and a bit of flour and a jurist's calm had made him feel less tall in his own room. Before he could speak, a knock struck the outer door, quick, official. The city clerk stepped in with a soldier at his shoulder. He looked more awake than in the morning, as if his day had finally given him something that felt like a conclusion. I come from the magistrate, he said. The watch found a boy in the alley by the burned shop. The baker's helper, your man named. He had a sack with bits of bronze and a spoon, marked on the neck like... He stopped, seeing the open chest and the small crowd of faces. Have I come in the middle of a count? He asked with a half smile. He enjoyed houses surprised by the city. The jurist turned. Describe the spoon, he said. Silver, the clerk said. Deep bowl, narrow neck, a tiny nick like a crescent. It was in the sack with some broken door iron. A fence, perhaps. He ran, he fell, he cried. We will question him in the morning. The boy's heart turned. The nick. The same small, moon-shaped bite he had noticed long ago. He thought the world strange, how a city of 1,000,000 lives could close a circle on a single bright scratch of metal. The master looked from the clerk to the steward. The steward bowed his head. A spoon in a thief's sack, he said, almost relieved. Then this is easy. The boy took it from the chest, planted it in the court to shift blame, passed it to a street friend, and now pretends wisdom with flour. Punish him, and the house is clean. The jurist's face did not change, but his eyes watched the steward as a cat watches a window. Or, he said mildly, a man who had a key took 2 spoons, passed one to a street boy to test the waters, left one in a boy's bedding to make the house easy to rule, and meant to sell the rest later. Seal marks do not lie when we know how to read them. The soldier near the door grinned and then made his face straight, remembering where he was. The room hung, balanced on a hair.
The master felt 2 paths open under his sandals. One was quick, shout, whip, fear, sleep. The other was slow, count, ask, look, maybe change a habit. Quick paths feel like power, slow paths feel like work. He looked at the jurist. He looked at his guests. He looked at the steward, the one who knew where his money went at night and how many jars of oil sat in the dark. He looked at the slaves, the silent wall that held his house up. He did not think of their hearts. He thought of his name. He turned to the boy. "You took the spoon?" he said, voice flat. "No, master."
You touched the key? I dust nothing but the floor, the boy said softly. It was true in the way that matters to God. Men like a different kind of truths.
The steward stepped forward. "Let me settle this," he said. His hand lifted, and for the first time, the boy saw in that tidy man's face the blank shine of a door with nothing behind it but a long, dark hall. "One good stroke in the court," the steward said, "and all lies fall out. The law calls this questioning. It serves truth."
The jurist's voice came quick and dry, like a reed snapped in a hand. The law calls it questio, yes. And even the law of Petronius, may his shade rest, says a master should not feed a slave to beasts or worse without a magistrate's eye. In this city, even a house's anger now and then must let another man look in. The master heard the name of a law on the air and felt the skin of his anger cool a finger's width. Names of laws felt like shade on hot stone. He did not love shade. He loved to bake in his own heat. But guests watched. A clerk stood with a soldier. A jurist had spoken like a teacher. His own seal looked muddy on his own chest. He said slowly, like a man swallowing something a little large, "We will sleep. In the morning the magistrate will come here. We will open the chest again. We will bring the street boy and the spoon with the nick. We will ask under witness. Until then no one leaves the house, not even the steward." Eyes moved to the steward. They had never seen him held by a rule inside these walls. His face did not change. That was its change. "Very wise," the jurist said, and made the words sound like a ribbon tied well. The clerk nodded and wrote a few lines with his reed. The soldier leaned on the doorframe, quiet and pleased that something interesting would pull him from his dull patrol at dawn. The household broke apart. Lamps were snuffed, steps went soft. Fear did what it always does after it is told it must wait. It went and sat in a corner, sharpening its knife with slow strokes.
In the sleeping room, Strauss sighed as bodies lay down. The grinder eased himself carefully to the floor and turned on his side. Livia rested on her mat, collar cold against her neck. The boy lay awake and watched the dark shape of the doorway. His small plan had grown into a larger thing than he had imagined. He had not thought of a clerk with a soldier. He had not thought of a law's name cutting the air like a clean blade. He had not thought he would see flour mark a man like a white whisper that would not be brushed away. He had hoped only to slow a wheel. Now the wheel stood still for a night, and the room felt like a held breath. He listened. The house had its night sounds again, mice, the ever-far cart, the cough of a man who did not think about slaves except when cups arrived late. But under those sounds lay another, the soft, almost inaudible scrape of skin on stone somewhere near the study. The smallest noise, the kind a lizard makes, the kind a patient hand makes when it does not want to be heard. The boy's eyes opened wide in the dark. He thought of the peg, the whip, the key, the chest. He thought of the steward told not to leave, and of men who do not think the word no applies to them when no one is looking. He thought of wax that could be warmed and pressed again. He thought of the street boy in a cell, and of a nick on a spoon, and of a dawn with a magistrate's eyes. He rose on his elbows and held his breath to hear better. The scrape came again, slower, then a small, careful click. He looked at Livia in the dark. She was awake too. He saw the pale coin of her eye turn. He put one finger to his lips and then pointed, 2 short touches, toward the study door. She nodded once, almost not moving at all. The boy slid from his mat like a shadow and put his bare feet on the cool floor. He moved like a cat through a house that could bite him. He made the narrow turn by the amphore. He came to the corner where the passage bent toward the study and the peg. He did not lean out. He looked at the wall opposite and watched, in the door's long, faint leak of lamplight, the shape of a hand that was not supposed to be there. The hand rose. It held a small blade and a coil of twine. It reached for the peg. The boy's heart pushed hard against his ribs, as if it wanted to run ahead of him. He had asked for order and witnesses and a slow morning. The night had other plans. He understood in a quick, cold flash that the next thing he did would decide not only where the truth landed, but where his back would be by noon, under cloth, under a strap, or under the open sky. His mouth went dry, his feet stayed light. He drew in a breath so thin it was barely air and shaped a word like a knife he could throw across the room. "Pastor," he whispered. The lamplight on the floor trembled. From inside the study, a stool creaked. The hand by the peg froze. The house, its gods painted on their little shrine, its chest with its muddied seal, its whip hanging like a smile that never reached the eyes, listened with him. The word left the boy's mouth like a small stone thrown into a still pond. "Master." A stool creaked inside the study. A shadow moved against the lamplight. The hand at the peg froze, blade held close to the thong of the key as a moth hugs bark. For 3 heartbeats, the house did not breathe. Then the master's voice, rough with sleep and wine, came from inside. "Who is there?" The hand jerked back, the blade slipped into the dark, a body slid soundless along the wall toward the servants' passage. The boy stepped forward from the turn and let the light catch his face. "It is I," he said, low and steady. "Forgive me, I heard a sound." From the other side of the door, the master rose. Sandals tapped wood, a lamp scraped in its ring. "Steward," he said into the passage. No answer. A sleepy house guard shuffled from his stool by the outer door, spear knocking ajar. "Here, Lord." "Stand at the study door," the master said. "Call the clerk." The guard, wide awake now, ran to the front, banging the bolt with the butt of his spear. The clerk and the soldier who had stayed the night came quickly, faces tight. The jurist, still dressed, stepped out from a guest room like a man who sleeps, with his mind already awake. "What is it?" the jurist asked. The master pointed toward the peg. "A hand, just now." The boy called, "I want eyes on this door until dawn." The clerk peered at the peg, at the whip, at the key. The faint flower still kissed the leather thong. The small breeze made by the moving men stirred the room. The house smelled of warm oil and old wood and something sharper, the clean metal scent of a thought about to bite. "Seal the door itself," the jurist said calmly. "We have sealed the chest, now we seal the room. The first one who breaks wax before the magistrate sees will answer for it with more than words." A little shrine hung near the study, a painted lares smiling mild smiles at household luck. The jurist took the tiny cup of lamp oil from its shelf, warmed a lump of wax in his palm, pressed his dolphin ring against it, and laid the bright eye across the door seam. "There," he said. "If night wants mischief, night must show its hands in the morning." The master nodded once. He did not like being ruled in his own house, but he liked order when it dressed him well in front of other men. He turned to the guard. "Sit where you can see the seal. If the wax cracks, shout." The guard sat under the shrine like a statue hired for one night. The house, shamed and stiff, went back to its narrow sleep. The boy returned to the sleeping room on quiet feet. Livia's eyes were open. In the dim, he saw their thin shine. He touched 2 fingers to the floor and then pressed them once, soft, against his chest, a sign they used sometimes when words would wake someone they loved. She nodded, almost not at all. Tolis breathed in the slow, heavy way a man breathes when his muscles ache inside the skin, but his hand lay palm up, as if a habit in him hoped even in sleep. The boy lay down. He did not sleep. He watched the doorway again and counted his heartbeats to the turn of night. In that long, dark hour, Rome felt very close. Not the Rome of triumphs and archways. The other Rome, the one that crouched in back rooms and listened for locks. The Rome that said a slave's truth must be dragged out with rope. The Rome that could kill 400 people in one day to prove a point about a house. He saw that Rome the way a man sees a mountain at night, not with his eyes, but with the weight of it pressing on his breathing. He thought of laws he had copied with his neat hand, lex vufia canania limiting how many slaves could be freed by will, lex alia sentia setting ages and rules for manumission, the lex patronia, the one they had named earlier, that said a master should not throw a slave to beasts without a magistrate's permission. He knew those lines were not mercy. They were the city protecting itself from its own heat. Laws were stone ditches cut to keep the fire from jumping to the next field. Even so, a ditch can stop a blaze for one night. He thought of the jurist's ring on warm wax and felt for the first time that words written by men he would never touch might sometimes cover a small person's head the way a leaf covers a bird when the rain begins. Dawn bled into the house like pale water under a door. The guard was still at his post, eyes red but open. The wax seal on the study door sat clean. The peg held the whip and the key, the thong still faintly whitened where flour had kissed it like a ghost. The city clerk knocked with his reed pen already in his hand. The soldier pushed the door wide and stood aside. A second soldier came with him now, and a boy in a rope belt, the baker's helper, dirty-faced, chin up and trembling. A wrapped bundle lay under the clerk's arm. The magistrate followed, a man with heavy lids and a mouth cut in a straight line that told strangers to be brief. He wore a clean white stripe on his tunic. Behind him, the jurist bowed as one bows to an idea one respects more than a person one knows. The master greeted the magistrate with the right words and a face that said, "I am a citizen and not afraid of light." People filled the court, and the passage like water fills ruts after rain. "Tell it," the magistrate said to the clerk. The clerk put the robe-belted boy forward. "Caught in the alley by the burned shop," he said. "In his sack, scrap bronze, a broken hinge, a spoon." "Not mine," the boy muttered, but the words came out dry and lost among sandals. The clerk unwrapped the bundle. He held up the spoon between thumb and finger. The morning light ran along its handle and pooled in its bowl. On the narrow neck, there was the tiny nick, the crescent the houseboy knew as well as his own thumb, a flaw he had polished around a dozen times. The jurist spoke first, not to the clerk, but to the household, as if teaching a sentence to a room. "Who handles the goods set?" "The boy and the steward," the master said. "At my word." The magistrate's heavy lids did not lift. "Open the chest," he said. "Let us count, then talk." The seal on the chest showed its muddy double face again. The jurist pointed with his thin finger. The magistrate grunted, "I see it." The steward's mouth kept its straight line. The boy felt the skin on his forearms tighten, as if the air had turned cold. The jurist warmed a pinch of wax, pressed his seal to record the new witness, then let the steward put the key to the lock. The lid rose, cloths opened. The line of silver gleamed like little moons in a dark sky. 12, the boy counted aloud as he unwrapped each spoon. Steady voice, good posture, the way he had been taught to speak numbers so a master could hear power and neatness. He came to the end. The two light cloths were still light. He unrolled them slowly. Empty, empty. The jurist turned to the clerk. "Show your find." The clerk held up the nicked spoon. The jurist took it like a man weighs words. He set it among the others, at the place where it would fit if the set were whole. The nick matched the small gap in the boy's memory. The shape matched the brothers lying in their soft beds. "Don't mean," the jurist said. "Found outside?" The magistrate lifted a hand. "Who had the key in the last day and night?" "The key hangs by the whip," the boy said, quiet. "You see this peg?" the jurist asked. He walked to it, touched the leather thong, held up his fingers. The pale flower, now dry and faint, still showed. He did not explain. He let the room's eyes tell their own minds what white dust on a dark thong meant at dawn after a night with a whispering hand. The magistrate looked at the steward. "You sealed?" "Yes." "Oath his ring?" "The master's." The magistrate pointed his chin at the jurist's seal on the door. "Break mine first," he said to the guard. "Then we look for the master's." The guard cracked the thin red eye. The study door opened. Inside, the chest of scrolls, the table, the lamp, the whip on the peg, everything ordinary, like a lie told often enough to become furniture. Whirling the master's ring, the magistrate said, The master held up his hand, the gold ring cut bright, its face carried the same dolphin and palm the jurist's ring showed, but deeper, cleaner, larger. The jurist pressed it into a pellet of warmed wax on the table so all could watch the mark form, a clear, sharp fish curling around its twig. He set the fresh seal next to the muddy one on the chest, the way a teacher sets two letters side by side for a child. The chest shows 2 kisses, the jurist said. One from this ring, he pointed to the clean mark, the other from a ring too small, too shallow, hurried. He looked up. Who in this house wears a ring? The master, the jurist, the steward. No ring, only a neat scar on his 4th finger where a simple band had once lived and been sold or taken. The clerk, no ring. The soldiers, no. The slaves. Rings were for owners or men too free to be watched. No one moved. The magistrate's voice did not rise, it pressed. Who touches the whip? Now the steward did move. I do, he said, and only a trained ear would have heard the tightness in the clean words. And the key that sits beside it? I keep the house, Lord. I keep the key. The jurist's eyes ran over the room like a thin blade. Then we ask a simple thing, he said softly. Steward, 2 of the best spoons are gone. One is in the clerk's hand, taken from a street boy. Where is the other? The steward's face did not change. Ask the boy, he said, chin toward the slave child by the door. He planned this with a friend. He meant to throw the house into doubt and find a gap to run through. He is clever. Clever boys without fear make bad houses. The magistrate looked at the baker's helper. The child stared at the floor and mumbled, "It is not mine." His voice held the hollow of the truth. It was in his sack, not in his hand, and that difference kept him alive in his own mind. A man put it there, he added, as if that fixed everything. What man? The magistrate asked.
The baker's boy swallowed. Tall, neat, eyes like stone. He gave me a loaf's end and said, "Carry this for me, take the long alley, and drop what you do not want when you hear a shout." He called me Little Fish. I do not like that name. The room turned, slow as a windmill, toward the steward. Many men are tall, the steward said gently. Many men own neat tunics. He smiled at the magistrate like a host trying to salvage a dinner after a storm. Let us not ruin a house over street talk. The jurist stepped closer to the steward. His voice dropped. Open your hands. The steward opened them. Clean palms, neat nails, a small line of flour in the crack where thumb meets hand that sleep and wiping had not managed to chase, like a whisper that hides in a page crease. Open your chest, the jurist said. The steward blinked. What? Your chest, your room, now. The magistrate nodded. Do it. A key from the steward's belt turned in a simple lock. His room was as neat as he was. Rolled tunics, straight sandals, a folded cloak, a small wooden box under the bed for coins and documents. The jurist knelt and opened the box with 2 fingers, the way a man opens a thought. Inside lay a handful of copper and a couple of small silver coins, a steward's honest pay saved over time, and, wrapped in clean linen, a spoon. The boy knew it before the cloth was fully open. The weight, the shape, the shine on the narrow neck. Even a blind man who had polish could have told it by the way the light sat on the curve. The nick? No, this one's neck was perfect. The nick lived on its brother, in the clerk's hand. But the family was clear. Here, in the steward's secret space, lay the second missing silver spoon. No one spoke. Even the little house gods in the shrine seemed to hold their painted breath. The magistrate looked up. His eyes were not cruel, they were very still. Explain, he said. The steward's neat face did a thing men's faces do when a habit meets the wall. It tried the old smile, found no purchase, and slid into a hard, flat plane where only anger grows. I keep this house, he said. For years I have saved the master's money from lazy hands. I have carried the weight of order while children play with flour and city men play with words. 1 spoon for the mine of my labor. Does Rome call that theft? Does Rome never take what is not hers? I would have put it back when the house remembered who keeps it standing. The words were clean, the meaning was not. The magistrate did not raise his voice. Rome will accept any man who says, "I took a little because I kept much," he said dryly. Today, Rome will answer, "Return the much and keep your little in a place with bars." He nodded at the soldiers. "Bind him." The steward's jaw loosed. He took one half-step back, and for a flicker the boys saw the man who hung whips in public and kept rules in private as his own shield. He was not a monster. He was worse for a house like this. He was ordinary and efficient. Such men build systems that do not need monsters to run. The soldiers tied his wrists. He did not fight. Pride becomes quiet when the room does not blink. The magistrate turned to the baker's helper. "And you," he said, "if you carry what a stranger gives you along a crooked path again, you will carry your back to the lash. Today you go home to your master with a warning." He looked at the clerk. "Right, return with a mark of admonition." He glanced at the jurist. "The spoon with the nick goes back to its chest." The jurist set the nicked spoon with its brothers. The set looked whole again, except for 2 empty wraps, now filled by truth. He touched the rim of the chest lightly, almost like a blessing for a thing that had been made to speak without shouting. The master exhaled through his nose, long and slow. He had been ready to be angry. Now he had to be grateful in front of men. Gratitude is a hard cloak for some. He turned to the boy. The boy lowered his eyes. "Your mouths made trouble," the master said, as if dictating an entry in a ledger. "It also saved me a story I do not want told about my house." He paused. The room leaned toward him without moving. "You will not be punished for the spoon." The boy let the words enter his body and sit there like warm water after dust. Not punished. Today, not punished. A day is a small thing. A day is everything when a whip hangs beside a key. The master's gaze flicked to the collar on Livia's neck, to Tullus's scar, to a boy's thin wrists. He did a calculation a free man can do between breaths. Fear makes men work. Law keeps neighbors from whispering too much. Kindness is a luxury best given at festivals and funerals. He looked at the magistrate and the jurist and chose a sentence that cost him nothing but sounded like coin. "This house will adopt a new rule," he said. "No question with rope, unless a magistrate orders it. We will seek truth with counting first." It was not freedom. It was not grace. It was, perhaps, a ditch cut between one fire and the next. For the people in the room, it meant some nights might be quieter. That is not a small thing. The magistrate nodded. He liked houses that made him less work. The jurist gave the smallest smile to the boy. No warmth, only the respect one gives a neat line written well by a small hand. The clerk scribbled. The soldiers led the steward away. The baker's boy, still shaking, pressed his brow to the threshold before the guard waved him off down the street. The house exhaled. Work, like a river dammed for an hour, rushed back in. The cook went to her brazier. Livia lifted trays. Tullus turned the mill, pain arguing with strength in his shoulders. The boy carried the tablet to the study to write the day's entry. His fingers did not tremble now. He wrote, "Count made, chest sealed, 2 spoons found, 1 in the alley, 1 in the steward's box, rule set, no rope without magistrate." He stared at that last line a long time. He knew a rule on wax is thin. It can be scraped smooth. It can be forgotten in an hour when anger enters a room like a storm. But he also knew that sometimes a thin line is enough for someone to step on instead of sinking. After midday, the jurist asked for water. The boy brought it. The jurist did not look at him. He looked at the cup the way a man looks at a thought. You saw, he said almost to the clay, that Rome is a machine that eats carelessness and spits out pain. When you drop a grain of sand in the right gear at the right time, sometimes the machine coughs instead of crushing. The boy said nothing. He was afraid that if he spoke, his voice would show his whole heart in the room. Do not be proud, the jurist added, and his tone was not unkind. There will be other days when the gear grinds and no sand helps. But remember where the pegs are. Remember who hangs what next to what. Remember seals. Rome believes in seals. He drank, he set the cup down, he left. In the courtyard, Livia passed by with a bowl. Her shoulder brushed the boy's arm by accident, and for a moment he felt the cool touch of the collar against his skin. It was light, really, just iron and a tag, but it weighed as much as a mountain. He wanted to take it off. He wanted to heat the key and break the ring open with tongs. He wanted to live in a world where he did not want things that would burn his hand. Near dusk, the master called the household to the inner court. He was in a generous mood, made of relief and display. He held a small purse. "For the good of the house," he said, lifting it so the sun caught the tie. "A reward." For a very small breath, the boy's chest lifted. He had not asked for this. He did not think of money. He thought of a road, of a door. He thought of a thing slaves held inside them like hidden fire, peculium, the little private store some masters allowed. With time, a man could buy his freedom with it. With time, a woman could buy a child's. The master tossed the purse to Livia. The boy did not let his face move. The room did not either. The master was not a fool. He had seen who had stood at the peg and who had spoken at the door. He had also seen who stood near his guests, with a bright tag that said, "To anyone who looked, I belong." He preferred a reward that said, "The house is kinder," without saying the boy is dangerous. Livia caught the purse. Her eyes did not grow large. She bowed her head. "For the house," she said softly. Later, at the laundry basin, she pressed the little bag into the boy's hand when no one else could see, and closed his fingers around it with hers. He shook his head. She pressed harder. Her voice was breath. "We will keep this," she said. "We, for the day when paper meets coin and a door opens." He felt the rough cloth against his palm and the smooth feel of 3 small silver coins and some copper. Not much, everything. Night came kindly. The house slept. The boy lay on his mat and let his eyes close for the first time since the long dark hour. He dreamed of letters traced on skin and of a river that did not ask for names. But dawn does not let a story stop where one person wants it to. At first light the next morning, a runner came from the forum. He was out of breath and out of ceremony. He bowed too fast and held out a wax tablet to the master with shaking hands. The master read. His face changed the way sky changes when a wind turns. He read again. He looked at the household with a new kind of fear, a wider, colder one than the fear of a missing spoon. He turned the tablet so the jurist could see, so the clerk could see, so even the boy by the door could see the neat letters. There had been a murder in the night, a senator's cousin stabbed in his bed. The law was gathering in the house. Voices were calling for the old rule again, the rule the boy had heard in whispers, the rule that said if a master dies by a slave's hand, every slave under that roof dies with him. The case yesterday had unsealed something ugly in the city. Men were shouting that fear must be the war. The master's hand shook, just a little. He looked at his house, at the people who had stood with him yesterday and saved his name, and he thought, as men in Rome thought when the city's big voice grew loud, that it might not matter what rules one house loved, if the Senate decided to make a lesson. The jurist's mouth drew tight. "They will call it safety," he said softly. "They will say the old ways kept Rome strong. They will say mercy is weakness. They will say fear is order. They will be wrong and still be heard. The boy felt the thin purse in his sleeve where Livia had hidden it. He looked at Livia's collar. He looked at Tullis's scar. He looked at the peg and the whip and the key. He thought of the chest, the seals, the spoon, the nick, the flower ghost. He thought of the heavy word that could fall from a marble room and crush a street in 1 hour. A new question rose in him, bigger than any he had asked so far, bigger than a spoon, bigger than a steward. What can a small hand do when the city decides to tighten every chain at once? The magistrate, who had come to like neat houses and quiet cases, rubbed his brow. "I must go," he said. "I must sit and hear this. I will speak if I can." The master nodded too quickly. Fear makes men polite to power. He said nothing to the slaves. He did not promise. He did not threaten. He did not know if his promises would be his to keep. By night, the door closed behind the magistrate and the jurist. The house's breath changed again. The boy stood in the court with the others and felt a truth that tasted like iron. Yesterday had been a victory inside one set of walls. Today, the city itself might bring the cross back to the door. He lifted his eyes. He had a purse with a few coins. He had the trust of a few people with tired hands. He had the memory of wax and seals and how power behaves when watched. He had fear. He had anger. He had a choice. The small animal in his chest, the one that had lifted its head when the spoon rang, stood now on all fours. Would he bow and wait for the Senate's mouth to speak his life? Or would he do the one thing a person under chains can still do when a big storm comes? Turn to the others in the shadow and say, "Here is the plan, and here is where we hide, and here is where we stand if we must." He looked at Livia. She looked back. Tullis's jaw had set into the shape a man's jaw takes when he decides pain has had enough of his back for one life. Outside, mule carts rattled on stone. Somewhere, a crier shouted the news with the smooth voice of a man selling fear like figs. The sun climbed and lit the dust so that every grain looked like a tiny star. The boy breathed once, deep and slow, and stepped toward the shadow where plans are born. The city woke like a hive struck with a stick. Men in the forum shouted before the sun climbed high. Messengers rushed with tablets. Soldiers leaned their shields where sellers used to lean baskets of figs. Words ran like fire across dry grass. "A senator's kin is dead. A slave did it. Make the house pay. Make every house afraid again." The master stood in the inner court with his cloak thrown over his shoulder and his jaw tight. He was a man who liked order when he was the one placing the cups. Now other men were placing the cups, and he did not like the taste they poured. He looked at his slaves and at the door in the same breath. He wanted to look strong to them. He also wanted to look safe to the men in the Senate. Rome pulls a man in two directions, like oxen pulling a cart apart. The boy felt that pull in the air. It hummed like a string. He had a small purse hidden in his sleeve. He had eyes that had learned where seals and keys and pegs make power visible. He had Livia and Tullus and a few kind hands who would follow a plan if the plan fit their strength. He could not change the Senate's mouth. He could shape one house's day. He spoke low and fast in the shadow of the storage jars. "Listen," he told Livia and Tullus and the laundry woman. "We must make the house look like a place where danger cannot easily live, not with talk, with acts that men in white stripes can see at a glance." "What acts?" Tullus asked, rubbing his shoulder where rope had bitten long ago. His eyes were calm. "Men who grind grain learn patience, that can break stone." "The peg and the key saved us once," the boy said. "Let the city see more pegs. Let it see more keys. Let it see that we seal what matters before anyone asks. If the master must go to speak, let him carry witnesses and numbers, not fear and empty hands." Livia's mouth was a firm line of thought. "We can count," she said. "We can list chores by name and hour. We can show where each of us slept last night and who stood watch at which door." She touched her collar as if it were a word she wanted to say carefully. "If a house looks careless, men feed it to the law. If a house looks guarded, maybe the law eats somewhere else." The laundry woman nodded. "I will set a cloth near each door with a bit of soft wax," she said, "and we press a seal when the door shuts. The master's ring will not go everywhere, the jurist's ring cannot, but a simple mark, a linen twist pressed in the wax, can still show a break." She smiled, quick and small. A poor woman's trick. The boys' plan grew sharper with their hands. They moved. By the pantry door, Livia tied a thin cord across the latch and touched a dab of warm wax with the twist of her linen so that the place would show any thief. In the corridor to the study, the boy rubbed his fingers in clean ash and brushed it lightly on the floor by the peg, the softest sprinkle, so a nightfoot would leave a ghost. At the side gate, Tullus hung a small bronze bell from a cord he set so high that only a tall man reaching up would touch it. None of these things could stop a man with a blade. All of them could speak in the morning. The master watched with an odd face, half insulted that his house needed tricks, half grateful that someone had tricks to give. He called for his cloak pin and signet. He called for a scribe. He called for witnesses. The jurist returned before noon, face set like a hard loaf, calm but not at peace. "They shout for blood," he said. "They say Rome has forgotten fear. They say a house must fear its slaves again, or the city will rot from the roots." "What will the law say?" the master asked. "Today," the jurist answered, "it will say, show me a house that keeps itself awake. It will say, punish clumsiness, reward care. It will not be just, it will be Rome." The boy stepped forward with his tablet held down and his voice held low. "Lord," he said to his master, "carry neatness into the forum, carry numbers, names, seals. If they ask, you will show that we counted at dawn. Stores, doors, watches, hands. You will say, my slaves woke me when danger breathed. You will point at me and at Livia and at Tullus and say, these three turn my house toward the law when the night wanted the key." The master frowned, not from anger, but from the weight of choosing who he was before other men. "You would have me name slaves as my strength?" His voice was dry. The jurist looked at him. "It is a kind of armor," he said. "Rome likes a man who seems in command, a man who says, 'I fear nothing because I see what happens in my house,' is safer than a man who says, 'I strike first because I fear everything.' Take the safer road when the wind is against you." The master nodded once. He liked armor. He liked safer roads that made him look tall, even when he bent. He went out with the jurist and the magistrate's clerk. He took the tablet with the morning count. He took the nicked spoon and the story of how it had been returned. He left behind the steward's room, its neat bed, its small box, its truth. The house stood quiet. Work went on, but it moved with a soft, tight rhythm, like a heart listening for footsteps. Livia brewed a pot of watered wine for anyone who might come to talk, because a cup can soften a hard mouth when it must say hard words. Tullus repaired a loose hinge with a wedge so that it would not squeal and make men jump. The laundry woman folded bandages and told herself they would not be needed. Toward midday, men at the door. Not soldiers, neighbors. 2 free men from the next street, faces pinched with worry, each with a slave at his shoulder. "We heard about your steward," one said to the boy, eyes flicking to the peg, the seals, the ash. "We heard you found theft with flour. We came to ask, how did you do it? The city is looking for houses to point at and say, do it like this."
The boy felt the oddness of the moment. A free man asking a child in chains how to keep control. He did not smile, he spoke plainly. Hang the keys where everyone can see who touches them. Seal what you count. Put eyes on what you fear. Write down names, not rumors. If you think a door moved at night, let the morning show a mark. If someone saves you from shame, let someone hear that before the next lash falls. The neighbor nodded. He looked at his own slave and then away. The boy saw in that look the quiet truth. Fear is a habit. Changing a habit hurts, even when the change keeps you alive. Afternoon. The master returned, dust on his cloak, voice rough. He walked into the inner court and did not make the house wait. They listened, he said simply, not because they are kind, because they are tired of chaos and want to look like men who hold ropes in their hands and not by their necks. What did they say? Livia asked. The first time she had asked him a question not about bread or fire. That this house is not careless, the master said. That I keep seals. That those under my roof stood watch. That my steward, a free man, not a slave, broke trust. That I removed him fast. That my slaves called the magistrate when night moved. They liked that sentence. I said it twice. The jurist made it sound like a clean stone. And the thing in the Senate? Tullus asked softly. He meant the rule hanging in the air like a net. The master breathed out and rubbed his brow with 2 fingers. They will tighten the chain, he said, not with new words. The old words are heavy enough. They will point to the case from years back, the 400 who died because a master died, and they will say, remember. He looked at the boy, but they also said, if a house proves it keeps itself awake, if it proves that its people tried to stop danger, then a magistrate may look with both eyes and not only with a fist. It was not mercy. It was room to breathe if you stood exactly right. The house heard it like a man with a fever hears that the water he wants is 2 streets away, not relief, a direction. The master lifted his head. So we will keep the rule we spoke yesterday. No rope without a magistrate, and more. Watches and counts at dawn and at night. Seals on what matters. Names on wax. I will look men in the eye and say, my house is a wall, not a rumor. The boy's heart thudded once, hard. A rule becomes stronger when a master says it in words other men have heard him say. It is still thin. It is not a chain on the master's hands, but thin cloth over a fire can save a child's skin. He would take it. He went to the study and wrote. He wrote the day's seal places. He wrote the names of watchers. He wrote the count of oil jars in which had chipped handles. He wrote the new rule at the bottom again and underlined it with a neat, straight line that did not shake. That evening, the neighborhood was quiet in a wary way. People spoke softly through door cracks. Down the street, a man with a watchman's staff sat on a stool and beat the wood softly with his palm, not with his stick. Toke, toke, toke. A small heartbeat to remind houses that someone was listening. The boy sat by the laundry room and shared the last piece of the honey bread with Livia and Tullus. They ate in silence. The bread was stale and sweet and good. The purse in the boy's sleeve felt like a warm stone. Keep it hidden, Livia said. We will add to it 1 copper at a time. Your name can be bought one day. Mine, too. She touched her collar again, angry and tender in the same touch. We will write our freedom with coins and with neat lines that make free men nod. We will not give Rome a reason to strike before it has to reveal its face. Tullus smiled, a rare, slow thing. And maybe, he said, one day your boy will teach mine letters with his finger on a palm, and no one will call it a crime. Night came. This time the house slept a little. The seals held. The ash by the peg lay soft and gray and unmarked. The bell by the side gate did not ring. In the weeks that followed, the city cooled a little. It did not become gentle. Rome does not become gentle by accident. But the big noise moved to other streets. Men told new stories in the bath. The case of the murdered cousin became a lesson spoken in the Senate more quietly, the way men tell a tale that warns without making everyone too tired to listen. Inside the master's house, the new habit held. Thin habits become rope when men repeat them enough times without thinking. Every dawn, the boy counted and sealed and wrote. Every night, Livia tied and pressed and checked. Tullus and 2 others took turns at the doors. The master bragged to guests that his house never slept on both eyes. The jurist sometimes stopped by to drink water and look at the peg as if it were a sentence he had enjoyed reading once. Freedom did not fall from the sky. Pain did not leave the city, but fear, in this one place, had to work harder. It had to show its face before it could raise its hand. One morning at Saturnalia, when masters put on slaves' caps as a game and the city laughed at itself without changing, the master called the house into the court. He held 2 felt caps, palliae, in his hands. He placed one on Tulis's head and one on the laundrywoman's head. For faithful service, he said, and he meant the words, and he also meant the show. Freed! Papers had been drawn. The names were written with careful curves. Points had moved. Witnesses had nodded. Livia smiled in a way that made her look younger than the caller wanted the world to think she was. The boy clapped softly. Tullus bowed, tears bright and angry in his lashes, because joy and anger share the same well when a man remembers rope and hears the word free in the same body. Later, behind the laundry room, the new freedman pressed a small, hard thing into the boy's palm, a coin, warm from his hand. For the jar, he said, for the day your name stands straight on a paper of its own. The boy added it to the purse. He kept the purse in a place no hand but his and Livia's knew. He wrote numbers that grew so slowly a man could miss the growing if he did not look each month by the same light. He did not boast. He did not hurry. He watched seals and pegs and keys and the way men in white stripes moved their eyes when someone said the word order. Years passed the way years pass in a big city, fast when you look back, slow when you look down. The master grew thicker, the jurist's hands trembled a little when he warmed wax. The magistrate went on to a higher post in a distant province. Livia bought her freedom with coins and with a letter the jurist wrote that said, "A gentle lie in a clean hand." She has always been faithful. Tullus worked as a hired miller and sent a copper to the jar every week as if he were still under the same roof and promise. The steward never returned. Men said he learned that a wall feels different when the door locks on the other side. As for the boy, he did not stay a boy. He learned to keep his back straight without daring the world to notice. He learned to read more than lists. He read the laws he had once copied without looking up. He read a bit of poetry and did not hate it. He saved. He'd bought his name back one winter day when the Tiber ran low and the city's stones looked older, and the jurist pressed his ring to a paper that mattered, and the master, older now and eager to look well in front of a small crowd, said words that sounded clean enough to feel true for a while. A freedman is not a freeborn man, the city reminds him every chance it gets. He carries marks on his skin and in his papers. He owes duties. He stands under a patron's shadow, whether he likes it or not. But he can walk out of a gate when he chooses. He can keep his coins in his own box. He can, if he is careful, walk into a room at night and call master in a way that wakes a man who needs to wait. He used that walk to visit houses where friends still slept on straw. He taught letters on palms after lights out. He showed young hands where to hang a key and how to read a seal. He told them this simple truth: when the city grows afraid, it will try to use your pain to calm itself. When it does, make it work hard for that pain. Make it look at wax, make it look at numbers, make it look at its own rules. Do not ask a wall to become a window. Ask to see the pegs that hold the wall. He married late, in a small room with a clean mat and a low table, and when his first child was born, he pressed the baby's palm with his finger, one straight line, one curve, and whispered the letters. "This one is an S," he said, and his throat closed, because a long time ago in a dark room, a woman had traced that same snake on his skin and given him a map to a day like this. He never spoke much about the steward or the spoon. He spoke about the night when Allah's eyes watched a door and a boy's breath made a sound that moved a hand back from a key. He spoke about the day fear came with a tablet from the forum, and the house chose to act like a house that did not want to be eaten. Years later, when he was gray at the edges, he walked under the arches Rome loved to build for itself and thought thoughts that were not new and not old, only human. He knew Rome still ran on chains. He knew ships still brought bodies that would be sold by their teeth. He knew whips still hung near quays and houses where no boy knew how to turn flour into truth. He knew the cross still rose sometimes at the edge of a road and the sky did not fall to stop it. And yet, He also knew that one house had learned to put seals on doors and names on lists before knives on backs. He knew one steward had been stopped by a nick in a spoon and a bit of white dust. He knew one girl with a collar had become a woman without one and had taken a purse from her sleeve to press into another small hand. He knew one miller's scar had not kept him from placing coins on a table with a silly smile of a man who still could not quite believe the word free was now part of his name. He knew that history is not only what senators shout, it is also what small hands do to make the shouting less loud where they sleep. If you had asked him, he would have said it plain enough for a child. Rome stayed strong because it demanded obedience. It stayed human when it did because sometimes afraid men were forced to count, to look, to ask for witnesses, and because the ones under the chain learned where to stand so that the chain became a little lighter for one more day. A city keeps its power with unspeakable tortures when it is lazy and proud. It keeps its soul, if it ever had one, when those in the shadows teach it to work for every bruise. That work begins with a seal, a key, a count, a voice in the night that calls a name at the right time. The boy who once lay awake listening to rope became the man who taught others to listen for locks. He did not bring down Rome. He did not save everyone. He kept one room awake. He lit one small lamp. He showed that even in a world built to make a person silent, a clear word placed in the hinge of the night can hold the door open long enough for a few more to pass through. And that is what remains after the marble breaks. Not only arches and laws, but the memory of quiet acts that said, "We are people, not tools," and made power look at itself in the light.